I want to begin this morning by reminding you of someone who has inspired more people through his story of a lifetime of failure than anyone else in history. And it's not Thomas Edison or Abraham Lincoln. It's Jesus of Nazareth. You see, Jesus of Nazareth lived a lifetime of failures. If you really think about it. So stay with me for a minute. Whether or not you consider Jesus' life through the lens of today's standards or through the standards of 2,000 years ago, Jesus would not have been described as wholly successful. That was a pun. Think about it. All right. Wholly successful, yes. Now, I'm not sure how you define success, and although it might be an entirely different sermon altogether, it is something to consider in order to put your failures in perspective this morning. So let's walk through Jesus. Jesus had a brief 3-year career in ministry. And for almost all of that time, he was, for the most part, homeless. On the road. So if you define success as a long career and some stability and security, he would have missed that mark. Jesus was despised by religious leaders and condemned by authorities. So if you define success as social status or recognition, he has missed the mark, at least in his lifetime. If you define success as family and friends, Jesus denied his own family, remained single, had no children, as far as we're aware of. And of course, he was betrayed by his closest friend. If success is about happiness, I would not say that Jesus was particularly ebullient. He was troubled his entire life by his imminent death. He was focused, serious, humorous in his storytelling methods, and always poignant, but I would not say necessarily happy. If success is about money, well, we all know that Jesus definitely did not make a lot of money. And even if you believe good looks make one successful, now for my Bible scholars out there, I'm stretching this just a smidgen. But in Isaiah, it suggests that he who would come had no beauty or majesty to attract others to him. There was nothing in his appearance that should make others desire him. And at his death, Jesus' reported last words suggest that he left this world feeling as though he had been forsaken even by God. These are not good facts. On one occasion mentioned in Matthew, Jesus was unable to perform the miracles he was intending to perform. He even blamed the people for this failure in his humanity. In Mark, he preached a sermon in the synagogue and offended almost everyone. The version of the story in Luke reads even more dramatic. The people were so incensed by his sermon that they tried to push him off a cliff. Now, don't get any crazy ideas. Jesus didn't just have faith, unwavering faith. He had faith in the middle of a life fraught with failure after failure after failure. His journey teaches us that faith in the midst of failure is more important than faith in the midst of success. He teaches us that human life will likely consist of a series of failures, but that life's value comes in living for our values despite the setbacks. So what happens? What do we do when the world gives constant feedback that we are wrong on all counts? When we are thwarted at every turn? How do we make sure that we feel like keep going on? What happens when failure happens to you? Are you paralyzed or persistent? How can we make sure our failures aren't simply momentary lapses. We want them to be momentary lapses, not complete collapses. Catherine Schultz, who's an author on a book called Being Wrong, asked an audience, what does being wrong feel like? What does it feel like to fail? Throw out some adjectives for me. What does it feel like? Some emotion. Downtrodden, shamed, embarrassed, lonely. I'll tell you what, you are so not alone when you're failing. You are the most connected to everybody fails. But I know that's what it feels like, doesn't it? Well, Catherine Schultz would say that we were answering the wrong question. She would say that we are answering the question, what does it feel like when you realize you have failed? When you realize you have failed, it feels hopeless, shameful, terrible, despicable, right? Schultz argues that actually the feeling of being wrong or failing actually feels like the feeling of being right. Until you know you've made a mistake, everything kind of feels the same. So we're back to those who wanted to throw Jesus from the cliff. Maybe Jesus felt that he knocked it out of the ballpark with that sermon that particular Friday. That day everyone was so incensed. Schultz says, it's not until we realize that we're wrong that we begin to feel poorly. And she uses a Wile E. Coyote analogy in order to illustrate this point. You've seen the cartoon, right? Here we go. Wile E. Coyote is chasing Roadrunner off the cliff, and the Roadrunner is fine, of course, off the cliff because he's a bird and he can fly. And then we see Wile E. Coyote running right off that cliff as well, and the coyote seems to be doing just fine, running on thin air directly across a gigantic chasm in between two cliffs, until the moment that he realizes that there's actually nothing below his feet. And there's this cartoonish, dramatic pause as he looks down and very typically, very loudly gulps, and then plummets to his doom. And because he's a cartoon, of course, he gets right back up after shaking it off and starts all over again pursuing the elusive Roadrunner. Now, there is some great wisdom in this Looney Tune classic that we can learn from this morning. Wisdom that I'm hoping will assist us in changing our relationship to failure. Because we do need to change our relationship to failure. You see, failure does not inherently make us feel anything bad. So in learning from our mistake, or of our mistake, we can make a choice about how to respond about how we have failed. What we do with the failure is actually more important than the failure itself. So realizing that we failed, I know it's difficult. It can sometimes throw us into such heartache and such heartbreak, even hysteria, hitting what we may feel like could be rock bottom. Have you been there? You know that rock bottom feeling? I want to suggest that rock makes a really solid foundation upon which to build up. That rock bottom can make an excellent foundation upon which to build. Most of us will agree intellectually that failure is a natural part of being human, right? But if we're going to try and respond differently to how we failed, we've got to redefine failure. Now, many years before Descartes said, I think, therefore I am, St. Augustine said, I err, therefore I am. I make mistakes, therefore I am. That's what makes us human, is that we're not God, right? That we're fallible. So human beings are fallible, they are failable, they are able to fail. Not only able, I would say, but likely to fail. We are inherently imperfect by definition. We by nature make mistakes. We know this is right? But when it comes to handling our own failures, our own mistakes, we are often our most severe critics, often our most severe punishers. So what if we made a decision today to redefine failure? To work at seeing failure not only as an inevitable part of success, but as a currency with which we buy our future success. Failure is the currency with which we buy our success. Each mistake, each failure is an investment in the value of that success. And the more committed you are to that success, likely the more failures that you're going to have. Let me give you a sales example, which might be helpful to understand. I'm pretty sure Marlon has mentioned to you before that for a summer in college, he was a door-to-door vacuum salesman. I'll give you a minute to imagine that. I bet he was really good at it, too. I am so glad that you were not satisfied in that particular success. Now, if each vacuum that Marlon sold made him $100, and he completed a sale on average of 1 out of every 5 attempts, then each failure was worth, in essence, I'm sorry you're doing math problems by story in church, but each failure would be worth $20, right? And if it was 1 out of every 10 times that he made a sale, then each failure was worth $10. And the fact that we can increase the number of failed attempts to 10,000 before the failure becomes worth almost nothing, right? 10,000 times. It's still going to have some value. Although the question at 10,000 knocks on the door to every $100 worth of sale is whether or not that's worth your time anymore, right? But failure, my point is, failure is never worthless. It's never worthless. But a 10,000 to 1 failure may not be worth your time, unless the payoff is really, really big. So what would you invest in where you do it 10,000, 100,000, 500,000 times with no reward? What would you possibly spend your life doing that on? How about justice? How about inclusion? How about trying to get to the promised land? Now, I was daydreaming while I was writing this sermon, which I do often. But I was daydreaming that one way to debunk this myth about failure, that it's not valuable, would be to create a new social networking page. It would be called Failbook, where we can record our daily failures and broadcast them to our friends and family so that making mistakes no longer becomes such a taboo subject. The great unspoken. You know, if you don't ever talk to your kids about your own failures, they're going to think they're always wrong. They're going to internalize that. You've got to talk to your kids about your own failures, right? It's the great unspoken. But can you imagine Failbook? It would be a place where we could celebrate failure. We could post, here was my mistake and here's what I learned, or here was why my attempt didn't work, this particular attempt didn't work, and here's what I want to try next. On the information page, you could even have a little biography about your history with failure. Maybe pictures of you failing. Your friends could catch you failing with their cell phone and post it. Tag you! Even better. Tag you failing. Look, you're failing in this picture. But on the information page, you could have a little bio about your history of failure that describes what you were taught growing up. Personally, I have to work really hard to counter my own fear of failure that was instilled in me as a young child. I've been shaped by my early education, that idea that failure is about making a 69 or below, right? About passing a test. It doesn't matter about the information that you retain over long periods of time. It doesn't matter about the process. It's about this one moment in time result, right? I was shaped by cultural pressures to believe in a demanding, judgmental, and authoritarian God. You know him? And I was shaped by a culture that focused on a need for me to be ashamed of my fallible nature. Not good. As a child, then, I internalized that failure. And so the mistakes I made became me. I was taught that failure is to be met with punishment. I learned that success would be to make it through a single day without failing, without making a single mistake. The more and more right I got with God, the fewer and fewer mistakes that I would make, until hopefully one day I would never make a mistake. Does this sound familiar to you? It's terrible. It's almost crazy. That's really sad. It distorts our personal value with our mistakes. If you remember nothing else this morning, please remember this. Failure is an event. It is a process, never a person. Will you say that with me? Failure is an event, a process, never a person. There is no you in failure. People are not failures. Turn to the person next to you and say, you are not a failure. Now tell me, I'm not a failure. No, say, I am not a failure. Louder. Thank you. So let's reimagine the word fail, please. Fail, F-A-I-L, to be forgive again in love. You hear me? Forgive again in love. Say it with me. Forgive again in love. Because when we fail, we should remind ourselves to forgive again in love, because you have failed in your life, I can guarantee it. And if you don't know when, you need to do some soul searching this evening. Maybe you can ask your spouse. I bet they can tell you. And you will fail again. In fact, I hope you'll fail again. I wish you failure in your life. How's that for a twist? No, I do. Because listen, if you can make it through a single day without a mistake, without a failure, then you have set the bar to your life too low. If you can make it through a single day without making a mistake, then you are just getting by. Right? All these people who fail every day are like, I'm doing all right. My wife says I'm doing all right. You are not living up to your potential if you don't fail every day. You may be, in fact, playing it too safe. Your goals might not be lofty enough. You see, risks and failure are closely interwoven. So what is getting in the way of you experiencing a daily healthy dose of failure? Do you choose not to risk because of the intensity of your fear? My suggestion is to feel the fear and do it anyway, because that is courage. Would you choose not to take a risk because the probability of success is not high enough? Well, if you only risk when the probability of success is high, then it's really not a risk at all. So stretch yourself to live up to your own potential by taking an even greater risk. So take risks not based on fear, not based on the probability of success. Take a risk based on the value of the goal. How badly do you want it? How important is it to you? How committed are you? Is it in line with your hopes and your values and your dreams, what God is calling you to do or be? Is it such an important goal that if even it is never realized, you will not regret having committed to the process of achieving it? Of moving one step closer. Some of the greatest risks are taken so that you can become part of a community who tried together and failed. A community of all souls. See, Moses never saw the promised land, right? And you know that old adage, if at first you don't succeed, try again. I'm going to give you one that's a little more important to me. If at first you do succeed, try something harder. Try something harder. It's too easy if you did it on the first time. But the pain that we feel when we realize we failed in life for taking a risk, so that pain that we feel when we realize we failed at something for taking a risk will subside over time. I promise you, you are in good company. But the pain that you feel for the failures in your life because you chose to play it safe, to not take the risk, those regrets are inconsolable. So take a minute And think about some of those posts that you might put on your Facebook page, how you might be tagged. What mistakes have you made in your life, and how have they transformed you? What risks have you not taken as of today that haunt you? Could you take one small step in that direction today? What mistakes do you feel as though you are repeating over and over and over again? You know those, I call those the holy 2x4. They just keep knocking you upside the head because you haven't learned that lesson, right? Maybe you could try this on. If you didn't like my forgive again and love, maybe you thought that was too sappy. Try this on. How about a failure is now a fertilized attempt in leadership? I got 100 of these, but you don't want to hear those ones. I thought this was good. I thought this was good because of the manure, right? Fertilized attempts in leadership, like fertilizer. So when you fail, you can take that manure and let it fertilize your next attempt, shaping you into a leader, someone who grows something magnificent out of the muck. So if you're following me on Facebook or Twitter, you may have already seen this, but it's an African proverb that I posted. It says, "Do not look where you fell, but look where you slipped." Don't look where you fell, but look where you slipped. Where do you look when you fall? Some people don't like to look at all. They just shut down. Or they speed up. Oh, just kept on going. Or they cover up. Did you fall? Or they back up and don't move forward anymore. Become overly cautious. Or they get angry. Stupid floor. You know those people, don't you? Other times we're so focused on where we have fallen that we don't learn from our failures, learn from our mistakes. So if you feel like you've analyzed and you continue to repeat the same mistake in that holy 2x4 kind of way, maybe you're looking at where you fell and not where you slipped. See, we learn not only from examining where we slipped, but it would also be helpful for you to check out the soles of your own shoes. Think about this. Maybe you're lacking some tread on the bottom of your shoe. Maybe there's a banana peel stuck to your shoe and you're carrying it around with you. Maybe there's just something on the floor and you slipped. I don't know the answer to that. It depends on what your failure is. But think about the possibility that it could both be the circumstances and your behavior. When we examine not only the circumstances of our failures, but also take personal responsibility, personal accountability for anything we might have done to contribute to that failure, we can stop the cycle of making the same mistake over and over and over again and take one small step towards success. I want to tell you one last story. A story that made an enormous impact on me when it comes to reshaping my own experience of failure. It comes from a book called Art and Fear. It's about a ceramics teacher who announced on the first day of class that he was going to try something completely new in order to grade his students. He divided his class into two, and he said all of those on the left side of the studio are going to be graded solely on the quantity of work that they produced, and all of those on the right on the quality. His procedure was simple. On the final day of class, he would bring in his bathroom scale and he would weigh all of the work from the quantity group. 50 pounds was an A, 40 a B, and so on. Those being graded on quality, however, needed to produce only one pot the entire semester. But it had to be a perfect one to get an A. Now, what do you think happened? Who do you think produced the highest quality pot? Raise your hand if you think your side of the room did the highest quality pot, the quality or the quantity group. Well, grading time and curious fact emerged. The work of the highest quality were all produced by the group being graded for quantity. It seems that while the quantity group was busily churning out piles of work and learning from their mistakes, the quality group sat theorizing about perfection, and in the end had little more to show for their efforts than grandiose theories and a pile of dead clay. Failure is counterintuitive. Do it again and again and again. Sign up for it. Ask for it. Welcome it. Greet it at your door. But see, we don't feel our way through it. We don't theorize our way through it. Not that we shouldn't calculate the pros and cons of good timing and good choices. And I wouldn't go so far as to say that quantity always trumps quality. Lots of failures that you pay attention to are actually a better way of learning than paralysis of perfection, though. So try and try and try again. Because it's our nature, right? We're human. On my way here this morning, I saw a sign on the road of the church that I passed by that often has terrible signs. But this morning, as I'm driving through, God sent me a cute little message. It said, "God doesn't have a plan B." And I thought, well, I do. And a plan C, and D, and E, and F, and G, and as many as it takes for me to be able to realize God's work on this earth. Right? So I want to go back just 1 second to Jesus before we end. You see, in the Christian tradition, God comes to earth to experience what it means to be human. I guess he wanted to come to earth to practice that whole plan B. And he gets a humdinger of an example, doesn't he? What it means to be human is that we will inevitably make mistakes. We will fail. And we need faith. We need the perspective of time and the big picture to move us from those little moments of shame and blame and humiliation, of realizing our mistakes, to get back on the path to faith in failure. To fortify us to keep working for things that really and truly matter. Because if they matter, you will fail along the way. Ultimately, though, we get to decide when and how the story ends. Will it end with this most recent failure? You know the one I'm talking about, whatever you had in your head. Will it stop there? Is that the end of the story? Or where you look where you slipped, and also take a good look at the soles of your shoes. Forgive again in love, and get back on that path towards your goal. May it be so. Amen.